This podcast is sponsored by Magic Rock Brewing. Currently, you can get free delivery on all orders over £40 and 10% of all online orders by using our code of TakesThatChance10.
Christopher Schindler has a chance to write his name in Huddersfield Town legend. And he takes that chance! Town down the left and Moy stayed onside. Here's Mounier! 2-0 Huddersfield Town on the opening day of the Premier League. 1-2 wicket Tunga. Here's Moy, right-footed. 1-0 Huddersfield Town. Lindelof misses his header. De Quattro's in. Round De Gea. 2-0 Huddersfield Town. 2-0 Huddersfield Town. Here's Zanka to turn it into the pass. Yes! And Tommins scored. Tommins has scored one of the most important goals of Huddersfield Town's history. De Quattro's forward. De Quattro's got the better. Yes! And Laurent De Quattro scores. Laurent De Quattro scores.
Hello and welcome to the warm-up, episode 14. 3 is the magic number, and it certainly is this week. Joining me, your host for today, Brady Frost, is Mr. Chris. Picked an iffy choice in last week's poll, so I did there, Markham. How are you, Chris?
I'm all right, mate. Thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I think I'm getting slightly better with the intro. Still not up to Matt's standard, but there you go.
You've got a long way to go to that, mate. But yeah, you're improving. That's all we can do, innit?
Yeah. We go again. Joining me and Chris on the pod is a man Town fans will know all well. He's becoming more associated with chicken than Nando's. It's Mr. David Hartrick. Dave, how are
you? Yeah, my podcast husband. Yeah. No, very, very well. Very excited to make my debut as always.
We're excited to have you. You know, a lot of new faces for the Town team and also for the podcast. So welcome aboard. So you should feel quite lucky, listeners, because we've got two Titan analysts coming together and Chris as well. So I'll stop you.
Nice.
Yeah, well, you got to let me have it. Anyway, so we'll go on to the game. So just an FYI for those listening, we are recording this before Bristol's FA Cup match against Millwall. So if we're talking about someone who's got a horrendous season-ending injury, and that cuts a bit of slack.
Or they've signed the best player the world's ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bristol, they're 9th in the table going into this game, but quite interestingly, they're below Town in the form table in the last 10, winning 4 and losing the rest. So they're a bit like Town, really. You don't really draw many matches, either just win or lose. But I'm sure we remember early in the season, we lost 2-1 at home after leading for quite a long time. But someone who will know that a bit better than us is Dave. You were actually at the game, the 2-1 defeat. What did you kind of make of it?
The thing is, I think when you're watching games on iFollow, it's very, very difficult. When you're there at the game, it never stops being quite weird. And it was one of the weirder games because some teams, I think, react to the atmosphere of playing in an empty stadium better than others. And I think Town have struggled, particularly when it's a really quiet stadium. Town have struggled because I think there's 1 or 2 players in Town's team who don't like being able to hear every single criticism from the bench and from anywhere else in the ground. And this was a very quiet night, but Town actually started pretty well and they got on the front foot. They played the 3-4-3 because Corberan likes to, when he knows it's a 2, he likes to have the man over, so he plays the 3 at the back, as I think he'll probably do again this game. And Town did okay, and they were forcing them back. It was a sort of typical Town performance this season of lots of good stuff, but if they could just sort of have that extra 10%, then they would have gone in at half-time 2-0 up instead of 1-0 up. The problem was Bristol were in a 3-5-2. They changed it to a 3-4-3, and their bench is just like, if you want to talk about a bench that's the polar opposite of Town's, it's Bristol's. Their attacking options off the bench are just incredible. And they, after half-time, they brought on Didio, who is one of my favourite Championship players, as I've mentioned on another podcast, because he's not the best player in the Championship by any stretch, but he can look absolutely unplayable on his day. Semenyo, who was absolutely brilliant and arguably sort of changed the game yet again. I mean, by the time he came on, Bristol were in the ascendancy, and then he really took the game away from Town, really. And then they bring on Jamie Patterson as well, who comes on and scores the winner. And they still had, Masengo, and there were a couple of others on the bench that you looked at and you thought, arguably they'd be starting for Town. Never mind, definitely on the bench. So it was one of those nights where, unfortunately, just having good players triumphed over anything sort of tactically or technically that could have been done. And you do get games like that. And unfortunately, on the night as well, I would argue that Corberan was slightly slow to react to the changes as well. So that when Semenyo came on and he was getting so much joy and so much space down the left wing at the start, and he ended up he switched wings at one point as well. It was one of those sort of learning curve nights, I would suggest, as a home game. And I think that the thing is about Bristol, I don't think they've really changed in the meantime. I think all those problems are the problems that Town are going to face again,
Go ahead, Chris. You seem like you're chomping.
No, it was an interesting one. Like you said, the two back threes, we played a back three against them, as you mentioned, and obviously both teams have gone away from that for significant time since then. It'll be interesting to see, and I'm just looking back to the game. I can't remember, Dave, you'll probably put me right, but when they brought Tommy Rowe off against us, did they change to a back four? And that's really when the game changed, if I remember it. But I might have got it wrong. And I think that's a really interesting one. Like you say, the strength of the bench is something we are more than aware of, obviously watching Town. But yeah, it's a really interesting one for me, that tactical battle. I mean, that back three changing. I think the interesting thing for me about Bristol City is I look at this squad and I agree with you completely. It's one of the better and more complete Championship squads. There's a lot of people who I know in there as well, and which obviously why I keep an eye out for them and almost, wanting them to do well. It's a big club. But I do think they lack a bit of depth and quality in the centre mid areas. Obviously, they had Pack and a few others, and they've gone. And I look at that. That's probably the one area where I think, do you know what? That's the weaker part of their team. I know they recalled Casey from Swansea, but then they played him on the right a couple of times. So it's just interesting to see how they'll evolve. And I think you're right. The problem they've got is probably a lot of good players at the back, a lot of good players at the top, and maybe in the middle they're trying to find the balance right to what is actually the best system for them. I don't think they know.
I think they've switched to 4-4-2, so they could, to be honest, they could be a bit more direct. And I think in certain games that works, and in other games, I mean, I know we're not going to go in depth on the Millwall game, but Town started in a 4-4-2, and when we were told they were going to be in a 4-4-2, me and Stephen Chicken were sort of, okay, well, that can go either way. And unfortunately, it went the wrong way, and they had to switch to a 4-3-3 fairly early. A 4-4-2 can make you very, very rigid, and I think with a 4-4-2 that if you play it really, really well, there is nothing. It's carrying a stigma now. 4-4-2, a sort of proper football man stigma, which it doesn't need to have. It's still a very effective, very good system, but you can play around it. It can make you far too rigid. So it depends. But I think they will go with a 2 up front, which I think Town probably will play with a 3 at the back. So it'll be interesting, because I think they'll have the options to as well with Sarkio, and we believe Edmonds Green is probably fit again, don't we?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'm interested to see that as well. Go on, Brady.
No, it's just it's quite nice to not have to talk and just listen to all this insight. So we'll come on to key players you think for the match. I'll just chip in first because you touched on them, Dave. I picked Semenyo. I think he's a player I've always liked, and as you say, I think he helped Bristol change the game last time he played. Interestingly, he's also got the most assists for Bristol this season with 6, and again, he's a player, you touched on it, I think would walk into this Town team at the moment. So he's one I think, like you say, depending on the formation we play at the back, Keogh and Sarr and, maybe Edmonds Green, if he is back, like you mentioned, need to watch out for. But he seems to be a bit of a super sub from what I've seen. But what about you guys? Who do you think is going to be the key player? I'll come to you, Chris, first.
Yeah, I think I'll go for one of the ones I probably know, and one of the ones who probably wants to win this game. Again, every time he plays it more than anyone is Jack Hunt. Obviously, they have, as you've mentioned, they have struggled in the last, they've only won 4 in the last 12, but all 4 of them were at home. So I think they are going to have to try and take that initiative. If they do play 4-4-2, which they have been doing, but with Casey or someone on the right, it's very similar to what we did at times when we had Scott Arfield playing in front of him. So as Dave says, it can be a rigid formation, but what the idea will be around playing Casey and when we played Scott out there is they'll come and drift inside into those areas behind the strikers and try and add a bit more depth to the play. So that gives Jack space, and that's exactly, as we all know, what Jack wants. I think his quality, is there for all to see in the final third. So I think it'll be an interesting one, because if they are dominant, or if they do try and go a bit more direct and get Jack in at the final third, I think he'll be an interesting one. On the other side of things, obviously, as we all know, as well, I'm sure we'll try and target their fullbacks defensively as well. It'd be interesting to see what formation we play, and we'll get onto that at the end. But if we do play with the wingers, if we do play with the 4-3-3 to try and use the wingers to keep Jack and De Silva pinned back, because I think they are quite big threats for Bristol.
Yeah, Dave, what about yourself? Who do you think is going to cause Town plenty of problems in midweek?
I think it's Chris Martin, who is. I think only Hunt and Viner have played more minutes than him this season, barring the goalkeeper. And the thing about Martin is he's had quite an interesting evolution, because he was very much a sort of old-fashioned number 9 goal scorer poacher type, and now he's become a sort of almost like a sort of Teddy Sheringham, Emile Heskey, unselfish provider type striker. And I think he's got 5 assists, maybe 5 or 6 assists this season, I think, in all competitions. Only got a couple of goals, but he is one defender's job for 90 minutes. He will not give them a moment's peace. He is very, very clever. He is quite happy to sort of drift into space and try and be incredibly intelligent, or roll his sleeves up and go toe-to-toe with someone. So you need to plan for him, because if you're not careful, he can tie up 2 defenders, and then suddenly you've got exactly what they want, which is the other striker in a little bit of space. So I think you have to plan for Martin, and you have to. The only way to do it really is to try and cut the supply off to him, I think.
Yeah, I'm interested that they've not really played Naki with him that much, which I'd have thought that everything you've just described there suits Naki down to the ground. So yeah, they've played Deadu up there a lot, as you've mentioned. So it'd be interesting to see. I think it wouldn't surprise me if I know Keith Downing and Simo, Paul Simpson, who are the assistants to Dean Alden. I've worked with them up until recently, and they're the sort of, they're shrewd football men, and they'll know that Naki, Casey, Jack, if Pato was fit, I think Pato's a big miss for them, but they'll all want to obviously play this game, particularly Naki and Jack. So yeah, I think that's an interesting subplot. But yeah, Martin's been a shrewd operator at this level for a long time, hasn't he?
No, definitely. And I think it's interesting that we've got Keogh in, because, like you say, I would be a bit nervous if it was Critchlow and Edmonds Green in the back three going up against him. So yeah, good to see that experienced guy. I mean, before we come on to Town key players, just a quick one. I know, again, we're kind of breaking the format of this pod. But what did you guys make of Keogh's performance against Millwall? I know it wasn't the best game, but just quite intrigued to mess up the order.
Do you want me to go first, Chris?
Yeah, go for it, mate.
Being in the ground, I there's anybody who's listened to any of the pods or read any of my work knows I'm not a Town fan. I'm exactly the same as Stephen Chicken, which is at this point we are heavily invested neutrals, basically. I was that game against Millwall, as Steve Chicken would tell you, he was sat behind me. I've never been as animated at a Town game before in my life. I couldn't believe. I was so frustrated by them, and I think to judge Keogh's performance, it's almost impossible, because he didn't really do anything wrong. I thought he was pretty good on the night, but his role on the night was to take the ball from the goalkeeper or a fullback and just recycle it across to Sarr or back out to a fullback. It was, Town played so deep and so negatively that it wasn't really a test, because when Millwall went 1-0 up, they realised, and Rowett realised, he moved Ben Thompson, who was playing as a central midfielder. He moved him up into position as a 10, but not as a 10, basically just as a pressing forward. And he just got Millwall into shape. And Town weirdly just retreated, and they just started playing in the centre of the pitch without being able to break any lines. And the problem was they were playing so deep with Keogh and Zaha, who were both getting really frustrated with it themselves, because they were giving themselves constantly 2/3 of the pitch to go through to get a chance, and effectively 3 lines to break. And it was nigh on impossible, and it needed to change. And I don't think Keogh did anything wrong, but I don't think he was really sort of challenged. It's not like he was up against, pace and speed and creativity and being pulled left and right. That was literally his job, was basically just recycling the ball constantly. So I personally, my feelings have been on the other pod that I don't think it's a bad signing from the point of view. It's a bit of experience. He's always been fairly good on the ball, but I think he can only play in certain situations and against certain forwards. And I think there's going to be far tougher tests to come when we'll see whether Richard Keogh is actually still a Championship player or not.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that, to be fair. His strength, it's difficult. He's somewhat a debut like that, obviously coming into a new setup, going behind early against the Gary Rowett team, who that's what he's great at, stifling. And just, I think anyone who's seen us will know, we have the highest percentage of our players in our own third in the whole league and the fewest in the final third. So keep us there, keep us in that middle bit. So obviously someone as shrewd as Gary Rowett out of possession, I think I mentioned before, that's his game. So obviously going behind early was a disaster. But I think, if you do give Keogh a little bit more freedom to drive with the ball forward, we always used to have to highlight him, and we'd always show them the opposite centre-back if we had one striker, because we knew that if he drives in, he can drive past the line with the ball at his feet and then pick a pass. And, a lot of Derby teams, they relied on him doing that. So, it'd be interesting, like you said, to see if he's still got that, because he can be he can be an asset for us. Obviously, we do have so much possession. Hopefully he can help us sort of progress the ball and make us a bit more fluid at times.
Just from that, Brady, is the next thing we're going on to Town's key player?
It is, yeah. So you can jump straight in, Dave, if you want.
Yeah, because basically what I've got down here is it's whichever central defender, after watching that Millwall game, is tasked with doing exactly what you just said, Chris, which is trying to step out defence a little bit and potentially trying to break a line or two and hit the diagonal, because Town really, really missed Schindler doing that. Schindler was really, really good at getting the ball and picking a diagonal and immediately getting everybody facing the right way. And they really, really missed that outlet. And Sarr likes to play out in a different way. He likes to carry the ball and get into a pocket of space and then pick his pass. And that's very difficult to do when you come up against teams that are tight and controlled, like Millwall were, like other teams have been. So that was one of the things about Keogh. I did wonder if this might be a game for him where he is tasked with just trying to get out. And it's Lewis O'Brien that you really want to try and hit with that ball as often as you can, and then try and get if you can hit your wide men from there, even better. But what you really want is Lewis O'Brien taking the ball already turned and running towards goal. And against Millwall, they did such a good job about making sure he had his back to goal every time he got the ball. So I think the Town's key man is it's a bit of a cop-out not picking an individual, but I don't know which individual will be tasked with it.
And it changes as well. They've done it if they play a back three, because if it's a back three, it'll be the outside centre-backs.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a back four, that obviously makes it a little bit more difficult to do that. But yeah, I think that's
particularly against the 4-4-2, because if Town realise that there is space between the lines, then that the person who's tasked with that becomes key to their whole possession plan, really.
Absolutely.
Chris, what about yourself? Who do you think key player for Town?
Yeah, again, it all depends. I keep saying it all depends on the system. But I am going to go for it, like I said before. I think that's where you can dominate the game, particularly against the 4-4-2, is in the centre of the pitch. If we do go back, that's the only thing that worries me a little bit about 3-4-3, is that we're not taking advantage of the middle of the pitch where they've only got two. If we play with a three, if you play with an extra centre-back versus move one of those centre-backs into the midfield, then you dominate that middle area a little bit more. So for that being said, I'm going to go. Normally, if I'm setting up a centre midfielder, it's usually Lewis O'Brien, because obviously I'm obsessed with him. But I'm going to go for Bacuna instead. Obviously, we keep staying it, and I think he's one of those. I think if they're not the most, that they don't have many shots. The second fewest amount of shots per game in the league. So I think he's one of those. It's like, we mentioned a bit about the Watford game. Don't make a mistake. And obviously we know that Bacuna can be capable of a head loss or a mistake, but on the other side, he can also be capable of doing something out of the ordinary, which I think this Town team are probably going to need to score some goals at the minute. So again, I think quite a lot rests on him, particularly if we're playing with three in midfield. That allows him to get a bit further forward.
And that's a good shout. I mean, I picked him last week, and I think it's more hoping he does something. But as Dave and Steve have been saying, he's been all right. He's been a bit more solid, if not spectacular. But I've actually gone for Aaron's guys, because I think obviously the Millwall game. Well, you don't need to be an analyst, but it was a bit crap from Town's perspective. One thing I did enjoy really was that little bit of skill that led to the penalty from Aaron's. It was a good ball, and O'Brien using his knowledge there to win that. And he's played a bit more than I thought he would at this stage. Again, that's probably due to injury, but he seems to offer, again, a bit similar to Bacuna. It can be a bit unpredictable sometimes, and I think for us to get anything out of this game, we might need him to step up. He tends to be playing about 60 odd minutes, doesn't he? So so he's the one I've gone for, because I think we're really lacking some quality going forward for chances. So anyway, we'll come on to Return to the Mac. Still not got the nice little jingle, and I refuse to sing it just yet. So anyway, I'll come to you, Dave. Who, if you could bring back any former Town player for this one-off game, who would you bring?
Well, I know he didn't play his best football for Town, and he certainly didn't play his best football for my own dear Brighton and Hove Albion either. But I would bring back Oliver Norwood to sit a bit deep, create, and the one thing he's always had at Town, Brighton, wherever else, however he plays, I have rarely seen somebody be able to take a set piece as well as him. And when you have somebody like an Abizar, to have that level of quality there would be pretty effective. And I don't expect it to be overly popular, because I know he's not. I'm hardly bringing back a legend here, am I?
I think that's because I was there with Ollie, and I think he was massively underappreciated. And I think the problem was, at the time, we had him and Clates as well, both to drop deep and dictate. There probably wasn't room in the team for both of them at that time. And he almost got overshadowed by Clates' personality as much as anything. I'm sure Ollie will say he learned a lot at Huddersfield in terms of that expectation, but you look at what he's doing now, and has been doing certainly last season more, but in the Premier League he's massively underappreciated. I think it's a great shout, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, he was fabulous last season. I am fortunate enough to I do every Town game, but I also do lots of games around Yorkshire, and I mean, watching him last season live, it's one of those. Became one of those footballers that you almost want to show to other footballers, because of the way he was just dropping into space. And not everything he tries comes off, not every pass he tries comes off, but the intelligence is just. He's a player who's continued to learn at every step of his career and continue to progress. And I think there's a hell of a lot to be said for that. And if you picked him up and dropped him into this Town team right now to get the ball deep and try and work it forward and break those lines, you'd see a huge difference.
Well, that's in my opinion, that should probably win the poll, because the reasoning is absolutely spot on. So it'd be interesting to see if, like I said before, who's voting on the poll. Are they listening? No. But no, in terms of Ollie, just to finish on that, I completely agree. He obviously used to be very much focused around in possession and just where can he get on the ball to affect it. I think now he takes better positions, particularly with Sheffield United's overlapping centre-backs, as well documented. He has to take clever positions for the transitional moments after losing possession. So I think that's what he's learned the most, and that really has taken him to that next level, because that's probably was one of the things that he needed to learn from his time at Town. Go on, Brady, who's yours?
Well, I am going to jump in there, Chris, because I think talking of segues, I actually picked Adam Clayton for this.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was just mainly because of his beard. I loved his beard. But no, he was, like you say, he'd be deep and kind of dictate the game. And again, he was a bit of a scrapper. And, particularly with Hogg out at the moment, I think we're really missing Hogg. I agree with you, Dave, from what you've been saying. I think he's been Town's player of the season, really. And he could also kind of get balls into the box when he could. So, I picked Clayton. And also, he can score a penalty, which we didn't have so much joy.
Well, he can also miss them as well. Do you not remember that Crystal Palace one?
Oh, yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that one great.
Anyway, and as a segue, brilliant. This is the man with the slickest pod we've ever done. So, but as a segue from that, mentioning Hoggy, I've gone for another centre midfielder, but I've gone a little bit further back, as I tend to do. But someone who is still at and around the club. I don't know how many Town fans will remember this who are listening, but John Worthington. So Worthy was the initial Hoggy, really, and obviously a local lad, came through in that League Two season, really. But in terms of his tenacity, quality on the ball, that's not what he's known for, maybe, but his tenacity and drive. And I think the run that we're on at the moment, you need that Hoggy character, and you need that. And Worthy was absolutely that. Maybe was more comfortable getting forward than Hoggy in terms of maybe getting to the box. He was not known for his goals or his quality when he got in the box, to be fair, Worthy, but he was absolutely that tenacious, energetic sort of leader, if you want. Obviously, he was captain for a bit, that you need. So I'm going to go for John Worthington. So that was probably the smoothest transition of a segue we've ever done.
You sound surprised, mate. It's just nothing.
I'm completely shocked. This is amateur hour. Anyone knows that.
Well, anyway, someone who might not be an amateur is one of the guys from the Bristol City podcast, BS3 Talk. I spoke to them ahead of the game, and here's what they had to say. We're recording. Cool. So I'm joined on the line now by James from Bristol City fan podcast, BS3 Talk. James, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. Enjoying the snow.
Oh, nice. Well, we don't have snow here up here, just frost. So makes a bit of a change.
You don't have snow up north, and we got it down south.
We had it earlier, mate. That's what happens. The north gets it first.
Yeah, we're a few weeks behind.
Well, anyway, we didn't come to chat about the weather. We came to talk about the football. So got the game in midweek. So obviously, last time we played you came away with a 2-1 win at our place. So what did you kind of make of the previous match when we played earlier in the season?
Well, it was a typical performance for the first hour or so. I think you were on top, and we just couldn't get going at all. And then that sort of second half comeback just got sparked. I remember I was listening to it on the radio at the time, and it sounded, and then watching the highlights after, Semenyo ran the game, Jamie Patterson was brilliant. And yeah, it was kind of significant, and it was symbolic of the football we were playing at that time. I can't remember exactly when it was. I think it was early November, wasn't it? And yeah, since then it's only really gone downhill. Very tough Christmas period, but after a stale couple of months, I think there's signs of hope again for City.
Yeah, that's kind of my follow-up question, actually. How has the season gone? And is Dean Holden still popular among the fans?
It's been a season like no other. Obviously, I think certain things have made this a different season for most clubs, but we've had quite the journey, obviously, from Holden's appointment. I think we won the first 5 games of the season. And then injuries. We've had a humongous issue with injuries. I think double digits in terms of players out for weeks at a time. Several players out for months, like new signing Joe Williams. Liam Walsh returned on loan. We haven't seen him at all this season. And yeah, as I mentioned, the Christmas period was very, very tough. We were losing to Birmingham were on a bad run. We played them at Ashton Gate, got beaten. Millwall were on their worst run for like over a decade. They came to Ashton Gate and beat us. So it's been a pretty torrid winter period. However, the last couple of weeks, we got some loans back, especially Casey Palmer, obviously former Terrier. Got him back. He's come in with some impetus. He's helped out the likes of Antoine Semenyo, who I'm sure we'll mention after sort of his performance at your place. And yeah, we're just looking to get some players back from injury and hopefully finding some form again.
Yeah, well, here's hoping from a perspective the form doesn't pick up in midweek. But we'll come on to the game now. What are you kind of expecting of the match on Tuesday?
Well, in terms of us, I think we've, as I mentioned, it's kind of picked up a little bit. We beat Millwall in the FA Cup 3-0 away from home in a pretty deserved performance. And the league form has ever so slightly picked up. It's the likes of Casey Palmer, Semenyo, who was excellent at your place, who I think will cause a threat. It's Naki Wells, another former Huddersfield man. Their kind of link up together is what makes us tick. And Famara Giju is always bagging goals. As far as I think you're concerned, you're in a pretty poor run at the moment. So, as per usual with our two sides, it's probably going to be a pretty awful game to watch. I can't imagine a goal fest. But yeah, I think it'll be quite tight.
So you mentioned it's not going to be a goal fest. I do agree with you, but I'll push you for a score prediction. So what do you think the score can be?
Is Josh Koroma, is he fit? Is he around?
He is not. No, still injured.
See that's a blow, isn't it? I know that much. I would go for our home form. It's just horrific. I can see a 1-1. I don't think anyone will really control the game, but I think we might come faster out of the blocks than usual, and then maybe you'll grow into the game. I'm hoping we can take a win, but I'm going to go with 1-1.
You what? We haven't got any points in 2021 yet, so I would take that. We'll see anyway, James. But thanks so much for coming on, mate, and best of luck for the rest of the season after Tuesday, of course.
And you, no problem.
All right, okay, so that's what they had to say. So we're going to move on quickly to what lineup you're thinking. So you're the coach. So what are you guys thinking? Again, I suppose injuries kind of dictate this one, but I'll come to you, Chris. Actually, what are you thinking for the lineup? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I've mentioned it loads of times, haven't I? I've not really been decisive over what I would do, but now you're putting it on my toes. I would go back to four at the back. I would trust that now you've got Keogh, who has been experienced enough at this level, and Sarr back, that they should be able to deal with two championship strikers. Understand if it was Edmonds, Green and Critchlow, you might want to give them a bit of extra support back there. The reason I'd do that is I would obviously want to, as I mentioned, I'd want to try and dominate the middle of the field. And I'd play three in there. So I'd probably move Vallejo up, like you say, depending on injuries, and have Bacuna and O'Brien ahead of him. The other reason I'd do that is I think, obviously, when you play 3-4-3, you're relying on your two wingers to get between the lines and be able to receive passes beyond their midfield line, because you can't really get your two centre mids to do that. Otherwise, you're often a bit exposed on the transitions. So I'd do that. I'd then think Bacuna and O'Brien are more adept and better at receiving between the lines, which means, the two wingers, whether that be, whoever they may be, obviously the four that are sort of in there at the minute, end up being they're maybe a bit more comfortable receiving out wide and trying to get 1v1 against their fullbacks. So yeah, I'd probably then, like I said, maybe would I go for Aaron's, obviously. I maybe put Wardy up front just to see, maybe give Campbell a bit of a break, and then bringing Benza back in. So that's me.
Lovely.
I'm exactly the same. Exactly the same. Even down to I would give Ward a run. I think what you really want to do certainly for the first half an hour of this game is just try and stretch that back four as far and as wide as you can, and let's see where the gaps are. Let's see where the spaces are, and adapt accordingly. So I would say I don't think he will. I think Corberan does like a 3 when he's playing against a 2. So I do think they more than likely will go to a 3-4-3. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Chris, to be honest.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's going to be a tight game, this as well, I think. We haven't done our predictions. We'll let Brady do his lineup, but it's going to be a tight game. They don't start quick. And I don't think they have like I said, they don't have many shots, but they concede quite a lot of shots. I think it's going to be I think it's going to go right down towards the end of the game. Brady, what have you got, mate? If you were the boss.
Well, it sounds like I'm just following on from you guys, but I kind of picked the same, really. Again, I think Campbell, probably needs a rest, and I think Ward really needs a goal, to be honest. So I'd just start him in a team that's not the second choice, to help him out, really. The only thing I would say is, again, I don't think Corberan will do that. So my 3 probably would be in Benza, Ward and Aarons if he does go for that 3-4-3. But yeah, again, I think there's rumours, obviously, of Mr. Holmes coming in. I think he'd make a big difference to this team when he does come in. But again, I can't really rely on him.
I'm just going to say, if Dwayne does sign, I'd definitely play 4-3-3, and I'd definitely have him as one of the 8s. Because that is the exact person we need picking it up in between the lines and driving forward. I think that adds a lot at this moment in time.
We said this on the other podcast that if you look at that as a 3, if you have O'Brien one side, Holmes the other, and Hogg in the middle when they're all fully fit, that's a pretty good midfield 3, for this division. And I know Town need to supplement it in other areas, but that's got enough bite. That's got a decent amount of running engine, creativity, etc. That's pretty good. And
the only thing it's not got is none of them are big in stature.
No.
When you come up against those, but you look at teams like all the Watfords, Bournemouths, Norwich, the blue midfield's massive.
But I've had this conversation with Mr. Shaw of this podcast. I honestly don't think Corberan is bothered by that at all. No. I just don't even think he sees it as part of the game plan.
Yeah, it could be right. I think not just that. Obviously, it's not just really from free play, because we try and keep it on the ground anyway. And those teams I've mentioned aren't exactly just route one, but I think it's more set pieces. I'm not anyone who would advocate changing your whole system for set pieces, but it is important in this league, vitally important, and it's just where we maybe struggle a bit. Then you look at Peeper's not exactly the most dominating in the air. Fraser's not huge. It's not a big team. I think going forward, but no, in terms of the balance of that midfield, I agree, Dave. I think it's a nice mix.
Well, not a big team, but they've certainly got a big heart, haven't they, Chris? Anyway, I could listen to you guys chat for ages. But, what do you think the score prediction is going to be? I'll go to you,
Dave.
Dave. I think Town can get a draw here. I do, because I think Bristol you can get at them, but I mean, I look, on paper Bristol should win this game. That's the reality with the bench they've got. But I do think Town can get a draw, and I do think there should be a reaction after that Millwall game. Plus, Bristol are likely to play a different team in the FA Cup this weekend, but there may be one or two who are a little bit tired. So I think I'm going to go with 1-1, slightly more in hope than expectation.
Brady?
Again, I feel like I'm just copied you guys and done no prep, but I actually did think 1-1 because they don't draw many games, we don't draw many games. So I think it'll be a draw, basically, was my thinking. And that's more of a hope than actually, I agree with Dave, Bristol should win this game, really. They've got the better squad and we're in a bit of bad form and we can't win away. So, but I'm going to be positive. I'm going for 1-1 as well. And for Ward to get his first goal for the club.
I hope you're right, guys, but I am going to go against your hope, and I'm going to go probably more with expectation. Again, they've not, I've mentioned earlier, they've only won 4 of the last 12, but all 4 were at home. They tend to finish games strongly as well, so as we found out last time. And that will be in part to the bench, I'm sure. So I think I can see them maybe grinding it down. I think it'll be it'll be a low scoring game. And I think it could be another 1-0 defeat. Maybe 2-0 defeat. I just struggle with us looking at, again, we look a bit toothless at the minute, which is my biggest concern.
completely agree. Well, I hope you're wrong, Chris. But I suppose we'll find out. But yeah, thanks to Dave for coming on. Thanks to everyone for listening, and I think that'll do it for this week. Fingers crossed for midweek. Cheers.
Oh, what a night. Late in May in 2017, Schindler scored, it was a heaven dream. What a feeling, what a night. Oh, what a night. Wagner singing, we are Premier League. The greatest sight St. George's Square did see. What an evening, what a night. Oh, I got a funny feeling when he walks and a fence, and then the commentator yelled he takes that chance. Oh, what a night. Lost so safe and mesmerizing me. Low charge and flattened all Chelsea. Stamford Bridge, oh what a night. Whoa, I got a funny feeling when he walks and a fence, and then the commentator yelled he takes that chance.